Del Monte is one of the original major food brands. Best known for canned fruits and vegetables, it originated all the way back in the late 1800s, well before most food companies were concerned with building a strong brand. See, back then, the clerk at the grocery store would typically gather the products for the customers, so the food companies were not nearly as concerned with capturing their attention with brands, logos, and labels. Well, in 1909, Del Monte introduced its now iconic shield logo, and ever since, it has been consistently found in grocery stores across the United States and many other parts of the world. I mean, this right here is one of the oldest, most recognizable brands out there, and to me, that is why so many of these recent news reports about them have been concerning. For years now, Del Monte has been closing multiple plants, including 2 of them in 2024 and 1 of them in 2025. Also, over this time, their credit rating has received multiple downgrades, so anyone following the situation was not surprised to learn that they filed for bankruptcy in July of 2025. The head of the company, Greg Longstreet, said, "After a thorough evaluation of all available options, we determined a court-supervised sale process is the most effective way to accelerate our turnaround and create a stronger and enduring Del Monte Foods." They have secured over $900 million to continue operating while they look for a buyer, so it is hard to say exactly what will happen here, but if everything goes according to plan, the cans should stay on the shelves and consumers will remain unaffected. But still, this marks a troubling time for a company that has previously managed to operate for over 130 years without filing for bankruptcy. I think it is a great topic, and people have been requesting that I cover it, so for this video, I want to talk about the complex history of Del Monte while identifying what I believe to be 5 of the biggest reasons behind its decline. Starting off with a more immediate, direct, possibly obvious reason, the pandemic. And I do not want to make it seem like it was all out of their control, because Del Monte was affected by it a bit differently than most other businesses. See, at first, they were positively affected by it. Many of us were staying at home and limiting our trips to the grocery store, so a lot of people were stocking up on canned goods. To meet that higher demand, Del Monte increased production. However, as the restrictions were lifted and demand fell back down, Del Monte failed to reduce production accordingly. In short, they made way too much stuff. They had extra inventory that they had to store and then ultimately had to sell at a substantial loss, as they put it. The company had already been struggling to turn a profit, and this made the situation worse than ever. And while I'm talking about profits, I should also mention that recent tariffs on steel and aluminum are also likely to have an impact on a canned food company like this. Del Monte has not been profitable for most of the last decade, and I do not see much reason to believe that things will be getting much better anytime soon. My next reason behind the decline of Del Monte is the fact that their products can be seen as expensive. From the beginning, Del Monte has been positioned as a premium brand. The name itself comes from an upper-scale hotel in Monterey, California. Throughout its existence, most of the advertising has emphasized the quality of the product, including one of their most famous campaigns, The Man from Del Monte, in the 1980s. To be clear, there is nothing inherently wrong with being a premium brand, but especially in the case of Del Monte, there have been drawbacks. Over the years, competing brands have attracted customers through catchy advertising, lower prices, and comparable products that many people might even prefer over Del Monte. Not to mention private label brands. I think at this point, almost any major grocery store has their own brand of canned foods that are typically sold for considerably less money. And all of this really becomes an issue when consumers are not willing to spend as much. For example, during times of high inflation. I know that I would be gravitated toward the lower price alternatives, and I have to believe this is part of the dynamic macroeconomic environment that Greg Longstreet says has been intensifying their struggles. Another reason Del Monte has been struggling is a falling demand for canned foods. Following World War II, a combination of social, economic, cultural, and political factors caused canned food consumption to skyrocket, and it remained at high levels until it started to fall in the 1970s. Despite being the first major food company in the United States to include nutrition labels on its products, there has been a growing perception opinion that canned food is not as healthy as fresh or even frozen food. I do not want to dive into that debate right now involving preservatives and BPA, but the fact is that for over 50 years now, the consumption of canned food has been generally declining, and that is not good for a company like Del Monte. Now, at this point, you might be thinking that Del Monte sells fresh pineapples and other produce, so that should compensate for the lost sales, at least to an extent, but that is not exactly the case. In 1989, they essentially split into two separate companies, one that would sell the fresh stuff and one that would sell the canned stuff. From that point, they have been entirely separate from each other, and right now, the canning company is the one that is filing for bankruptcy, so that is where this reason is applicable. I also want to mention that there have been multiple attempts to expand into different areas. For example, they owned Hawaiian Punch for a few years before selling it to Procter & Gamble in the 1990s, and they used to make pudding before selling that division to Kraft in 1995. So they always seem to return right back to the canned produce, which I guess makes sense because that is the core of the brand. I want to explain that a little further as I talk about my next reason behind their decline, changing ownership. Just to give you an idea of how many times the Del Monte brand has been bought and sold over the years, I put together a brief overview of each owner, but I will warn you that it does get complicated. Here we go. The Del Monte brand was started by the Oakland Preserving Company. 7 years later, that company merged with 17 other canning companies to create the California Fruit Canners Association, or the CFCA for short. In 1916, that company was combined with a few other companies to form CalPac. Now, over the next few decades, the company became synonymous with Del Monte as its core brand. So in 1967, it was still the same company, but the name of it was changed to Del Monte. In 1979, Del Monte was acquired by the tobacco company R.J. Reynolds, who, by the way, acquired Nabisco a few years later and changed their name to RJR Nabisco. In 1989, all of RJR Nabisco was acquired by a private equity firm called Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, or KKR for short, technically making them the new owners of Del Monte. The following year, a group of managers led a buyout that separated the company from KKR. Then, in 1994, they were almost acquired by a Mexican investment group, which would have reunited them back together with the Del Monte fresh produce operations, but the head of the investment group had all these legal issues, so the deal never ended up happening. However, in 1997, Del Monte was sold to a different investment group called Texas Pacific, who referred to Del Monte as a diamond in the rough because they were already struggling to maintain customers. 2 years later, Del Monte was placed on the stock market with a $300 million IPO, and I hope you are still following this because it just keeps getting crazier. In 2002, they made an unexpected shift when they bought the pet food business from Heinz that included many notable brands, including 9 Lives for cats and Pepperoni for dogs. In 2006, they spent over $1 billion in separate deals to buy more popular pet food brands, making them the second largest pet food company in the country. Can you believe that by 2010, half of Del Monte's sales were coming from pet food? Well, that year, they were acquired again by KKR. In 2013, they sold the canned food business to Del Monte Pacific, based in the Philippines, and renamed the pet food business to Big Heart Pet Brands that was later bought by Smuckers for over $5 billion. So, as of 2013, Del Monte's canned food business, now called Del Monte Foods, has been owned by Del Monte Pacific, along with a few other similar brands, including Contadina Tomatoes and College Inn Broths. That was a crazy list, right? I would say maybe a bit too crazy. Aside from the fact that business plans and strategies have been constantly altered and reversed, I do not think there has been much passion behind it. What I'm saying is, I do not think a person controlling the brand has ever had a personal connection with it. Certainly not over the past 40 plus years anyway, because it has commonly been a small piece of a much larger corporate strategy, often being bought and sold before anyone can even execute a long-term plan. My final reason behind the decline of Del Monte is too much debt. It all ties in with the previous reason, but I cannot imagine many companies out there have been consistently struggling with debt for as long as they have. Going back to that list of owners, most of those deals were leveraged to an extent, meaning debt was added to the company and then there had to be efforts to reduce it to a more manageable level. That 1989 deal, for example, where KKR acquired R.J. Reynolds, well, that was the biggest leveraged buyout in US history at that point, and that is where they were separated from the fresh fresh produce business because KKR sold it to reduce the debt. When they were bought by that management team the following year, 80% of the $1.47 billion was borrowed, and then that's where they sold the Hawaiian Punch brand and the pudding division to try to reduce that. The 2010 deal at the time was reported as the biggest leveraged buyout this year, and for the 2013 deal, over half of the $1.7 billion purchase price was borrowed. Ever since, Del Monte is owed around $1 billion in long-term debt that has resulted in close to $1 billion in interest payments. Many of those money-losing years, including 2024, would have been profitable if not for the interest expense. My point here is that for many decades, Del Monte has been dragged down by large amounts of debt. It has been like an anchor that has forced them to sell parts of the company and has prevented them from making investments that could strengthen the brand or the operations behind it. After all, this right here is the most direct reason behind most of their recent issues. They would not be filing for bankruptcy or looking for a buyer if their debt was at a more manageable level. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Del Monte? Are they the best at what they do, or do you prefer one of the competitors like Green Giant or Dole, or maybe you stay away from all of the canned produce in favor of the fresh stuff? Also, what do you see for the future of Del Monte? Is it strong enough and established enough to survive the bankruptcy and all the other issues, or maybe you think it isn't? Things are kind of up in the air at the moment, so I'm curious to see how it all plays out. And any other thoughts you have about Del Monte or anything else in this video, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.